These three disturbing Alaskan horror stories are inspired by real events. First, a loner realizes the blue ribbons appearing near his cabin are actually a sick countdown to a deadly trap. Next, a mother inexplicably drags her kids out of a warm home and walks them straight into a freezing hell. And finally, a man steps outside and simply ceases to exist. Make sure you watch until the very end, because searchers tracked him to a discovery in the snow that defies the laws of physics, and you need to find out exactly what happened to his final step. When blue ribbons began appearing on trees near Leif's remote Alaska cabin in 2013, he thought it was just a strange prank. But as the ribbons moved closer each day and his neighbors Linnea and Declan began disappearing, he realized that someone was using those ribbons to track him, and he was running out of places to hide. Before that, his life was his own. He lived completely off the grid in a small, tight cabin. His world was defined by quiet, hard work and the predictable rhythms of the forest. If the day was Monday, water was hauled from the creek. If the stove was lit, the heat would last 6 hours. If the barometer dropped, a storm was coming. Everything had a reason, a cause, and an effect. That orderly world was the foundation of his peace, a peace he was about to lose. The first ribbon he saw was just trash. That's what he told himself. It was about 50 yards from his cabin clearing, tied tightly to a pine branch. The plastic was a bright, ugly blue that looked wrong against the muted greens and browns of the wilderness. He figured some hiker had strayed way off the old logging trail miles to the east. It was an irritation, a sign of the outside world he'd worked so hard to leave behind. He made a note to cut it down, but the weather turned, and he had wood to split before the rain. He put it off. A few weeks later, the local radio, crackling with static, sputtered out the news. Leif's nearest neighbors, a couple named Linnea and Declan, were missing. They lived over the ridge miles away, but in this part of Alaska, that was next door. They weren't rookies. They were tough, capable people who knew the woods. They had walked into the hills with a rifle and a full pack, and they never radioed back. Search parties went out and found nothing. People in town just shook their heads and said it was the price of life out there. A fall, a bear, a sudden storm, a simple, sad tragedy. Leif felt the loss, but he accepted the cold logic of the woods. The wilderness could be cruel. After the news about the couple, a new blue ribbon appeared. This one was only 20 yards out from his cabin. It was tied to a thick willow branch that hung right over the small creek where he got his water. He saw it and his breath caught. This wasn't a hiker. He tore it down, his hands fumbling. He stood there for a long time, scanning the tree line, listening. He heard nothing but the creek and the wind. He told himself it was a coincidence, a terrible, strange coincidence. 2 days later, one was tied to the fence post marking his small vegetable garden. This was just a few feet from his front door. The next morning, another one appeared. This one was tied to the support post of his front porch. He had slept, eaten, and worked, and someone or something had been close enough to touch his home. The wind was blowing and the plastic was crinkling and snapping. It was a faint, sharp noise that seemed to follow him, a sound that wasn't supposed to be there. Ribbons don't just move on their own. This was not random. This was a deliberate act, a measured countdown. Leif stopped thinking about hikers. He realized someone was using these ribbons as markers, systematically tracking an approach to his cabin. His isolation, which had once felt like protection, suddenly felt like a perfectly set trap. His trust in his secure environment was gone. He was being hunted, He had to know if he was alone in this horror. He grabbed his rifle and hiked the trail to his friend Jeb's cabin, a trip that usually brought a sense of relief and human connection. Jeb lived even deeper in, a true old-timer. The walk there was different this time. Leif wasn't just walking, he was stalking. His eyes scanned every shadow. His rifle wasn't slung on his back. It was held in his hands, ready. He felt it then for the first time. A constant, heavy presence. He felt eyes on his back, watching him from the deep, dark tree line. Every time he snapped his head around, he saw nothing, just dark, silent, and motionless trees. The feeling was a weight on his skin, a prickling awareness that he was no longer the only predator in these woods. When he reached Jeb's clearing, the place was wrong. It was dead quiet. The cabin door was open just a crack, banging softly against the frame in the breeze. Jeb never, ever left his door unsecured. Leif called his name. "Jeb! You in there?" Only the wind answered. He pushed the door open. The stove was dead and cold. Not just cool, but stone cold. Jeb hadn't had a fire in at least 2 days. The inside air was thick and stagnant, smelling of old, unused space. On the small wooden table, Jeb's favorite hunting knife, the one he skinned everything with, was gone. Leif went back outside, walking the perimeter, feeling the familiar dirt and gravel crunch under his own heavy boots. Near the woodpile, he saw a distinct set of large, recent boot tracks. He knew Jeb's boot print. These were his. They led straight away from the cabin toward the thick brush at the edge of the forest. Leif followed them. They were clear in the mud. Then they reached the edge of the leaf litter and the wild brush. And they stopped. Leif stood there, his mind refusing to understand. The tracks just ended. There were no other prints. There were no drag marks, no broken branches, no signs of a sudden acceleration or a scuffle. They just stopped, as if Jeb had been plucked straight up out of his boots. Leif looked up. He saw nothing but branches and gray sky. The sound of the wind in the tall pines was strangely muted, as if the forest was holding its breath. Leif went home without an answer, knowing he was completely alone with a horror that defied logic. That night, the threat shifted. It moved from stalking to a direct physical violation of his home. Leif's cabin was secure. It was his fortress. It had a heavy wooden door with a solid steel bolt. He'd checked the bolt 3 times before dark. He sat by the fire, his rifle across his lap, trying to read. He was listening to every sound, the pop of the fire, the moan of the wind. Then he heard something impossible, a low, smooth, grinding noise. It was coming from the kitchen. He froze, his eyes locked on the door. The steel bolt was in place. He could see it, yet the door itself was moving. He watched, his mind screaming, as the top edge of the heavy door slowly scraped upward against the frame. It was lifting, just a hair, without splintering the wood or bending the steel. There was no sound of a hand or a tool, only that unnatural, steady grinding of wood on wood. Something was lifting his locked door, as if an immense, unseen force had casually picked it up to see what was inside. Leif rushed the door, slamming his weight against it. He grabbed the handle, yanking down. The bolt, which had been lifted partway out of its hole, snapped loudly back into place. He held on, his back pressed to the door, listening. Nothing. Just the wind. His mind raced. A door should splinter. A lock should break. But this one didn't. It just lifted. He realized his home was a psychological prison. The locks were only delaying a confrontation. He didn't sleep. He sat with his back to the wall, rifle pointed at the door, until the gray morning light came in. He knew he had to get out, but he had to check one more time. He had to be sure. He went outside, scanning the silent trees. He checked under his porch, and he found it. A length of tightly braided rope, looped and tucked under the floorboards. He hadn't tied it. He hadn't placed it. Its function felt malicious, a dark mystery planted for him to find. The threats escalated from psychological pressure to genuine physical danger. He took one last walk on a game trail near the eastern border of his property, and he discovered the snares. They weren't thin wire for small game. They were constructed with heavy cord and thick, sharp branches, built clearly and expertly to catch a human leg. They were set for him. This was the complete removal of his personal agency. He was no longer a person in a home. He was prey in a pen. He could not fight this enemy. He could not see it. He could not reason with it. Leif gathered the few essentials he could carry and fled his cabin permanently. He left everything else behind: the warmth of the stove, the rhythm of his life, his only sense of safety. He walked away from his sanctuary, forced out by an escalating series of violations that made it clear the entity would not stop until it claimed him. He reported the snares, the missing people, and the strange events to the nearest authorities. Due to the location's remoteness, they never properly investigated. They took his statement, but he could see in their eyes they thought he was crazy. A man who had lived too long alone in the woods. His terror was dismissed, filed away. The final horrifying understanding was this: the blue ribbons were not random, they were not trash. They were the markers of a systematic stalking pattern, placed deliberately to announce the approach. A terrible countdown. A blue ribbon appeared, then Linnea and Declan vanished. A blue ribbon appeared, then Jeb vanished. The ribbons were the symbol of the trap, and he was lucky to have barely escaped it. The events leave an echo, a question about how easily a place of absolute safety can be corrupted and turned against the person who trusts it. Sometimes, the most terrifying monsters don't need to attack. They just need to watch and wait. Aspen left her Fairbanks apartment with her 2 young daughters in the middle of the night in October 2012, taking nothing with them. But what her family didn't know was that they were walking into a trap in the Alaska wilderness, and they would never come home again. Midnight in Fairbanks, Alaska, is no joke. This was October. This is the time of year when the cold is just starting to show its teeth. It's not the deep, dark, -40 of January yet, but it's a warning. It's the kind of cold that gets in your bones if you aren't prepared. It's when you double-check your fuel oil, you stack your firewood, and you make sure your family has what it needs to face the dark. And this is a place that knows the dark. Aspen, at 28, was a mother. She wasn't a tourist. She knew this life. She had her 2 little girls with her, Michaela, just 7, and Sila, only 4. Their entire life, especially at that time of year, was about preparing for the oncoming seasonal siege. Your apartment isn't just a home, it's a fortress. It's the one place you are safe from what's outside. It's your baseline of normal. But on one completely unremarkable night, that sanctuary just failed. The whole family unit, all 3 of them, vanished. They disappeared without a trace or any logical explanation. The second they were gone, everything you're supposed to be able to trust, your home, your locks, your routine, it all got violated. Police were called in, they got to the apartment, and the initial search was baffling, methodical, clinical, and completely baffling. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken glass, no overturned furniture, no kicked-in door. Nothing to suggest a forceful entry or a desperate fight. The lack of chaos made the situation instantly more terrifying. Usually, A violent crime leaves a violent mess. This was quiet. It was clean. It was like they had just been erased. The investigators noted that the family had simply ceased to be there. This is where the story truly cracks open. The cops are walking the rooms, trying to build a timeline, and they see it. The family's winter coats, the heavy-duty ones, are still hanging in the closet. The kids' snow boots are still by the door. Aspen's purse is on the counter. Her cell phone is there. Everything a person would grab in an emergency, or even just to leave, was still there. But Aspen's car keys? They were gone. Think about that. She left the money, the phones, the coats. She took the keys. The last confirmed moment was around 3 a.m. Aspen quietly left the apartment, pulling her 2 children into the pre-dawn darkness. This was unusual behavior for a family situation, and that's the understatement of the year. This wasn't a family running from a fire. This was something else. No suicide note, no sign of mental distress, and certainly no reason for a mother to grab her kids and walk into the lethal night with just the clothes on their backs. This complete lack of conventional evidence was the first signal that this was not a normal case. This was the violent intrusion of the horrific into the mundane. The case immediately turned cold. A heavy, intentional silence. The first real clue came later, and it was a disturbing sign. It proved the keys theory. It showed this wasn't an impulsive act. In a dense wooded area, investigators found the car seats for Michaela and Sila. They were just dumped, haphazardly. This confirmed the investigators' creeping dread. This wrongness was not a random accident. It was a pattern. She drove there. She deliberately took her children in the family car to this spot and then abandoned their safety seats. The environment once trusted now felt like it was part of it. The search for the family continued through the long, dark winter. And if you've never been through a Fairbanks winter, you just don't know. The sun barely comes up. You get a few hours of gray, weak light, and then it's pitch black again for 18 hours. The temperature plunges. The snow buries everything under feet of white. How do you search for 3 people in that? The detectives followed the faint trail, but all avenues of escape and help had been systematically removed. No one saw them leave. No one saw them walk down a dark road. The system, the police, the missing persons reports, the search parties, was rendered completely ineffective by the wilderness itself. The wind whistled through the barren trees. The only sound was the crunch of their own boots in the deep snow. Then, in July 2013, the cold case was brutally cracked open by the heat of summer. The thaw finally gave up its secret. The remains of Aspen, Michaela, and Sila were finally discovered. They were found in a highly remote area, miles away from any well-traveled path, near the meandering flow of the Chena River. The location was the part that chilled the cops to the bone. They were 2 miles off trail. Let's be clear about what 2 miles off trail in Alaska means. This isn't a stroll in a city park. This isn't following a deer path. This is hell. This is pushing through dense, tangled alderbrush so thick you can't see your own feet. It's climbing over fallen, rotting spruce trees. It's slogging through muskeg that'll suck the boots right off you. It's a place that requires extensive hiking knowledge and a will of iron to reach. Why? Why would a mother with 2 small children in the middle of a freezing October night abandon her car seats and then hike 2 miles into that? The scene itself was a clinical nightmare. The remains were in a state of decomposition, indicating that death occurred shortly after the October disappearance. The horror was no longer implied. It was manifest. The investigators, men who prided themselves on logic, felt their control over the situation completely removed. All that was left was the horrifying realization of their helplessness to understand. What followed was the most devastating and frustrating phase of the investigation. The forensic analysis and the police inquiry provided no resolution and offered zero comfort. Investigators scoured the area and the remains for evidence of foul play. They found none. No obvious wounds, no bullet holes, no knife marks, no signs of a struggle. But they also found no logical explanation for the deaths. The official conclusion remained a terrifying paradox. The family was dead, but the cause was undetermined. They were murdered by a logic that defied human reason. The terror was not in what was found, but in what was withheld. The case file has been reopened multiple times since, a continuous agonizing loop for the family members left behind. But time and again, the same facts stare back from the report. No arrests, no leads, no suspects, and the case officially remains unsolved. True horror does not end when the immediate threat is gone. It leaves a scar. This story doesn't conclude with an arrest. It concludes with an unanswerable question that remains a hole in the community's sanity. How did a family walk into the wilderness and die of no explainable cause, 2 miles from a road, taking nothing with them but the car keys? The most terrifying stories are never about monsters. They're about the inherent fragility of the reality we take for granted. This is a story about the thinness of the veil between the safe and the unspeakable, and how easily that veil can be punctured. The unsettling aftermath is the permanent psychological scar. The cold silence of the unsolved case is the final transmission. Every person in Fairbanks who knows this story still looks out their window at 3 a.m., hearing the wind pick up outside, and asks themselves the final haunting question. What kind of unseen force can force a mother to walk into the wilderness and commit the perfect, inexplicable disappearance, leaving nothing behind but a permanent, terrifying question mark? Logan stepped outside his remote Nome cabin for what should have been a routine task in minus 20-degree weather. But when his roommate found him gone hours later, his footprints had completely vanished from the snow, as if he had simply disappeared into thin air. This was back in 2011. Logan was 34 years old, an Alaska native. He knew this land. He wasn't some tourist who didn't know the rules. He was staying with his roommate Michael in a cabin way outside Nome, Alaska. And when I say remote, I mean remote. You couldn't just drive there. You needed a serious 4-wheel drive truck, and you could only even try it during the dead of winter when the ground was frozen solid. Any other time, it's just a swamp. No neighbors for miles. No one to hear you shout. Just you and the ice. The cabin itself was just a box made of rough timber. It was the only thing between them and the elements, and it wasn't holding up. A bad storm had come through and torn up the roof. They'd patched it, but it was a bad job. That damaged roof was a real problem. It let the cold in. You could feel a draft all the time, and it made this sound, a constant low whistle as the wind pushed through the gap. It was the only sound for miles, and it was the kind of sound that wears you down. That night, the weather was a killer. Minus 20 degrees, not even counting the wind. It was snowing too. A hard, blowing snow that meant zero visibility. You couldn't see your hand in front of your face. This is the kind of cold that doesn't just feel cold. It hurts. It feels like 1,000 tiny needles in your skin. It's a physical weight. It's weather that wants you dead, and it doesn't have to work hard to get the job done. So Logan tells Michael he's going outside, just for a minute. A routine task, something with the generator, maybe checking a fuel line. The kind of thing you do 100 times. He pulls on his heavy coat, shoves his feet into his boots and steps out. Michael, inside, hears the heavy door pull shut. He hears the latch click. He goes back to what he was doing, tending the fire. In a place like that, you are always tending the fire. It's your lifeline. An hour goes by. Michael's reading, maybe cleaning his gear. He's not worried. Logan's a tough guy. He knows the land. He knows what he's doing. Another hour passes. Now the quiet in the cabin, it feels different. It's not just quiet, it's empty. The only sound is that damned whistling from the roof. Michael gets up. He calls out, "Logan?" Nothing. He calls again, louder. "Hey, Logan, you good?" Just the wind. He walks to the door, pushes it. It's solid. He jiggles the handle. It's locked. He freezes, locked. He was inside. He heard the latch click. He tries to run it back in his head. The door was locked from the outside. That makes no sense. Why would Logan lock him in, or lock himself out? In this? In 20 below? A feeling of sharp, clear panic hits Michael right in the chest. His hands are shaking now. He fumbles with the deadbolt, unlocks it, and shoves the heavy door open. The wind just about rips it out of his hand. The cold is a physical thing. It hits him, takes his breath away. It's like being punched. He steps out onto the tiny porch, screaming Logan's name. His voice is just gone. The wind just snatches it. It's snowing so hard it's like a solid wall of white. He can't see the generator, can't see the truck. He can't see anything. He stumbles back inside, slams the door shut, and throws the lock. His heart is pounding so hard he can feel it in his throat. He leans against the door, trying to breathe. He looks around the small, single-room cabin, his eyes darting everywhere. He's looking for a note. He's looking for a sign of a struggle, a broken window, an overturned chair, anything. There is nothing, and the cabin is perfectly neat. No sign of violence, no sign of anything. Then he sees it, and this is the part that makes it all go sideways. On the small wooden crate that Logan used for a nightstand, right next to his cot, is his wallet, his keys, and his cell phone, still plugged into the charger. You don't go anywhere in Alaska without your gear. You don't go to check the generator without your keys. You just don't. But his coat was gone. He took his coat, but not his wallet, not his phone. It makes no sense, none. The scene is too clean. It's too orderly. It's just wrong. Michael starts to pace the small room. He's trying to remember the last few hours. He tries to remember exactly what Logan said. Checking the generator. Is that what he said? Or was it checking the snares? He can't get it straight. The panic is making his memory foggy. He can't remember when Logan left. Was it 2 hours ago? 3? He gets on the satellite phone. The connection is terrible. He's trying to explain to a trooper what's happening, and his story is a mess. He keeps changing the timeline. He's second-guessing every word he says. He sounds confused. And to the cops on the other end, he sounds unreliable. This is the official story. Michael allegedly provided inconsistent statements about Logan's last movements. The case is already starting on the wrong foot. Getting a search team out there is a nightmare. The conditions are terrible. The remote location makes it almost impossible. But they get there. Troopers. Search and rescue. These are not rookies. These are men who have seen everything the land can throw at them. They are methodical. They are professional. They start at the cabin. The snow is a perfect white blanket. And right there, leading away from the porch, they find them. Footprints. A single set of footprints leading away from the cabin. Logan's boots. There's a second of relief, hope. Okay, he's walking, he has a direction. We just follow the tracks. The team follows, the tracks are clear, they are deep. The stride is normal. He wasn't running, he wasn't stumbling. He was just walking. Straight out, away from the cabin, into the black, into the blowing snow. The team follows, flashlights cutting into the dark. The only sounds are their own boots crunching on the packed snow and the steady, sharp hiss of the wind. The man in the lead, a guy who's been doing this for 20 years, just stops. He stops dead. He holds up a gloved hand. Everyone freezes. He shines his high-powered flashlight down at his feet. Then he shines it forward, then back at his feet. He sweeps the light in a wide, slow circle. There's nothing. The line of footprints. Logan's footprints. They just end. There is one last, final, perfectly clear boot print in the snow. You can see the heel. You can see the toe. It's pointed forward. And beyond that final print is nothing. Just a flat, pristine, undisturbed sheet of white. The searchers are just standing there, stunned. They check everywhere. There are no scuff marks, no drag marks, no sign of a struggle or a fall, no blood, no animal tracks of any kind, no wing marks from an owl or an eagle. And the most terrifying part? There are no tracks leading away. There are no tracks turning back. A man in that kind of cold, in a desperate survival situation, if he gets lost, he panics. He turns around. He tries to get back to the cabin. He struggles. He moves. He doesn't just stop. He didn't fall and get covered by the snow. It wasn't that deep. He was just gone. He was in the middle of taking a step, and on the next step, he was erased. The team is baffled. They're spooked. These are professional, logical men, and this is illogical. This is impossible. They searched for days. They brought in dogs, but the wind was too bad. They expanded the grid. They searched for miles. They looked for anything. A hidden crevice, a drift, a hollow. They found nothing. Absolutely nothing. A case like this, what do you do with it? You're in a remote location. You have no evidence. You have no body. And your only witness has a story that is full of holes and sounds crazy. The case ran cold. Fast. Due to the remote location and that total lack of evidence, it was over within months. It was just another open file in a cabinet. Logan's disappearance is terrifying all on its own. But it's not on its own. It's one story in a much larger, much darker one. His name, Logan, a 34-year-old Alaska native, became another statistic. His disappearance is framed within the ongoing, devastating crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous people. It's a nightmare that has been happening for generations. People, especially Native people, disappearing into the vastness of the land. Erased, sometimes by violence, sometimes by indifference, and sometimes, like with Logan, by something so impossible it leaves no answers at all. His family was left with nothing, no closure, no body, just this impossible story, this permanent psychological scar. What force is so complete, so total, that it can take a man from the middle of his own footprint? What takes a person and doesn't even leave a mark in the snow? The real horror of it is the simplicity, the lack of a fight. 1 minute, you're here. You're a solid person, leaving prints in the snow, breathing the air. The next, you're just gone, leaving nothing behind but a story that no one can ever explain, and the sound of the wind whistling through a broken roof.